A fledgling musician at the start of a career is a delicate thing. I've been told I shouldn't swear. And I was planning to introduce you to my inner artist and to let him out of his box. And I can assure you, if I let my artist walk onto the stage, he would swear. So I'm not going to let him out. I'm going to tell you what it was he said when I let him out of the box. I don't give up about making money. I think rock music is junk. I am a genius. The Who were okay, but without me they would all have ended up working in the flower market or worse, in Led Zeppelin. John Peel played some records that were so bad that I thought he was taking the sometimes. This inner artist is snotty, really, but really, as an artist, really doesn't give a damn about this lecture. Give him a piano and a guitar and a decent way to record, a pleasant room to work in and a few free hours, and he's happy. I mention all this because I think this is what creative musicians, this is all they want. They want the resources and the facilities to make the music, and they're happy. But then, when my artist is done, he hands this lecturer the end product and says, there's a work of genius. Try and live off it for a while, you Philistine. I say that to myself. I was invited to give the first John Peel lecture at the BBC in November 2011 in honour of the great broadcaster and DJ. I talked about Peelism, the approach of someone who had actually taken the trouble to spend time listening. And I had first really learned the supreme importance of listening from Roland Kirk in the 1960s. I talked about my own inner artist and pointed out that my £6 fee would be passed to the Musicians' Union Benevolent Fund. Nick Goddison, still effective chairman, president of my companies, had been diagnosed with cancer of his neck and was undergoing chemotherapy. Without his benign hand on the reins, I splashed out, attempting to indulge my inner artist and get some music flowing. In 2008, I bought myself a creative studio in a wooded area of Surrey, a 50-minute drive from my home, and leaving the largest room otherwise completely empty, I put a Yamaha Concert Grand Disclavier piano in it. This allowed me to improvise, recording the mechanical performance when I felt ready. I could then listen to the piano playing back what I'd recorded as I stalked around the room, singing whatever lyrics came into my head. This is where the first music for my new opera Floss began. Floss is hopefully going to be a kind of Sonne Lumiere event, the Wall meets Cirque du Soleil. I've already composed some good music, written some lyrics I'm pleased with, and arranged special studio systems to help me tackle the technical challenges I see ahead. This is another quadrophenia for me, almost as technically challenging as life is. But today I do have the computers I need to overcome almost every technical obstacle. I'm still working on this as I write this book, and it's proving to be one of the most ambitious projects I've taken on. When I turned 70, I was going to enter into a period of my life that I called the rage. And it wasn't so much about getting my anger shine, it was just about fuck off all of you. And I will do whatever I fucking want. And what actually then, of course, happened, I was about 65 years old, 66, it was 2008, 2009, was when I made this amazing announcement to everybody around me, including everybody I love as well. What is it that I want to do? And I thought, well, you know, I really want to do something huge, something big, but also something completely open-ended. It's a dark tale of a young man called Walter Dockstader, who puts his pub rock career behind him to create a labyrinthine garden. He starts to hear the almost musical sound of the shared anxieties of all the middle-class families around him who fear for their children's future. His young wife is Florence Spritzler, Floss. Her tempestuous story is the other strand at the heart of the tale. A horse rider, she's loosely based on Louise Ray, but I don't want to give too much more away. I'm very excited about this project.
You know, the interesting thing about all of this stuff is it's all been done. You know, every great story has been turned into a novel or a film or an opera or whatever. And so I thought, well, I will write something myself. And what I wanted was to write something that was mythic, that was deep, multi-layered, and this was the result.
I realised that what I would have to do with this time was to make sure that I had a really rock-solid story to work on, because I don't think I can take the usual license of the rock star, which is that, you know, at the end of Tommy he walks up the mountain and you don't know where he goes, and at the end of Quadrophenia he goes out on a rock and it rains, and what happens next? The idea there is that we leave it to the audience, and I thought, I'm too old now to get away with that. You know, it doesn't end because you have to end it, and I wanted something that was also absolutely rock solid so that I could work on it in an evolutionary way, in an unfolding way. You know, I should probably never have used the word opera, because I don't know whether this will be an opera. It may be a song cycle, it may be a reading like Under Milk Wood, I don't know. But I've written a libretto based on the book, and writing the libretto based on the book was fantastic because I knew the book by heart and I just wrote this verse, and so the book had a function. And the idea of writing a novel for me was partly as a function, but then partly, as I've said a couple of times in other interviews, when you write a novel, what you don't expect is that the story and the characters are going to take on a life of their own, and in the end they write themselves.
Was that conception there from the beginning? Or
Yes.
did you think to start with, you know, I'm going to do a novel?
You know what I started with? 13 or 19, I don't know how many, maybe somewhere between there. Descriptions of almost apocalyptic scenarios, but some of them are just of chaotic visions.
This has the function, this may well remain between the pages, but what I'm hoping is that it will take off and lead me to other things.
So there are about 15, let's say average it out, 15 soundscapes. This is the stuff of this story. This is the guts of it. This is the backbone of it, which is this young musician develops out of the blue. He's performing in a band in a nightclub. He does it it's the way he makes his living, but it's not a particularly good living. He's not hugely successful. But he starts to hear the anxieties, the fears, the distractions, the tension swilling around in the audience that he's playing in it. And it distracts him so much that it disables him as an artist. He can't continue to work. And he's encouraged by his godfather, who's the narrator of the book, to write down what he hears. And he does that. And so I have those soundscapes, and that's where the whole thing started, with those essays. What was I going to do then? I was going to realise them as electronic music, possibly as orchestral music, might write it myself, might commission somebody else to do it, have a few songs written to go in between the soundscapes. And then I realised actually what I really want to make sure is that at some point the people understand the whole point of this is not just to tell a story about a young man who's psychic, but the fact that is what's going on in the audience this is important.
I've got my audience. You know, I've got them. It's not that I would feed on them. It was that they would pay the fucking rent. You know, and for every artist, for every creative person, there's this sense that the only way that you can measure your worth is, unfortunately, with money, with success. And that's not really what should be true. You know, we should be able to be creative and be comfortable that each one of us, everyone here, is a creative being. You know that and I know that. But what you know is that I've managed to pull it off to such an extent that I've got a big house in Richmond. and some of you may have a big house somewhere, I don't want to be patronising, but what you probably don't have is a creative track that is so clearly demarked as mine is. I know exactly what I need to do next as a creative, and that's a fantastic thing to have. But that comes from the permission being given to me by the audience. And yes, I am receptive. You know, I find, for example, being on Instagram and being active on Instagram, I get an incredible sense of sensing out what people are doing, what they want, where they are in their lives, and whether the people that communicate with me on Instagram are very young. And so in some cases I end up like a mentor. I'm actually commissioning music from electronic music musicians that I've met on Instagram. And there are some geniuses out there.
There was beginnings of political polarisation. Anxiety that was happening then was a fairly low level. I think people were worried about pollution. Either, I think, was social media as effective a disseminating vehicle, but also an interruption and a destructive vehicle in the way that conversation is disabled. It becomes broken up and it becomes reduced. And one of the things that causes that, I think, is a lack of context. So today, the lack of context in conversation. For example, when we see somebody trolling somebody else, we have no idea who they are or why they're saying what they say. When we see somebody saying something is fabulous, we have no idea who they are or where they're from. With the late Deborah Orr, for example, I would always run to what she wrote and always love what she wrote, even though I didn't necessarily agree with all of it. But, you know, she was fiery and she was fun and she was always solid. You knew the context because she was a journalist. And journalism has now been co-opted by the internet. Now, that wasn't the case when I started this project.
So do you feel there's
now
an element of your own antennae picking up, as Walter does, the vibes and channeling them into the book?
Yeah, to some extent.
You were at art school and interested people like Gustav Metzler, and then you came out with a solo album, Who Came First, which was very spiritual and about Mia Baba and very gentle and very very companion with this. Quite good to listen to that album and read this. But I'm fascinated by the contradiction, and it seems like this book is about a group of people trying to come to terms with the contradictions in their past. You know, the things that they did that they shouldn't have done, or the things that they did that they don't understand, or the things that happened that they didn't even know about. And I wonder if you're aware of the successfulness of contradiction and collision and paradox, because we're in an era now where art has to be, film and music are very homogenized and purified and auto-tuned. Whereas it strikes me that you're one artist that's always been very good at articulating the strange contradictions and paradoxes and inconsistencies of humanity.
Do you see there as being a kind of connection between, if you like, borderline insanity or ecstatic experience and creativity?
Yes, I do. I think artists definitely see things in a different way.
But one of the things that also needs to be said about it is that the way that you write about music, surprisingly, is glorious. It kind of reminded me of On the Road, the way that Jack Kerouac writes about music. And I read a lot of people writing about music, and there's some people that can do it really well, but I don't think I've come across anybody that does it as well as you do in this book. And you actually, you sort of make the sound of music in these words. It's stunning poetry about music.
Closed eyes, blindness, then flashes an infinite universe, layer after layer of stars, each promising a new beginning. A clarinet plays scales, disciplined, regular, obviously read from a book for practice and fluency of eye and hand. Gentle, the soft, reedy, slightly honking sound of the lower notes rings across a small suburban room, setting glasses rattling on the table. The player sometimes leaves his position at the music stand, and when he feels familiar enough with the section of the music approaching, begins to walk around the room, raising his instrument to the ceiling. Over this cascading, regimented, and predictable non-music music comes the sound from the next room. A baritone saxophone, wild, playing with no boundaries, barking, stopping with blocking clicks, the rattling of the complex brass key system adding up percussive rhythm in scales and extemporizations. Among all this swooping music is what sounds like a swooping light, like a kind of electronic ray whooshing. Then a piano in the wrong key, or is it in any key at all? The player is using mainly his right hand, his left, framing the bounding chords at the beginning of every 4 bars or so, and then flies all over the chord, up and down like a bird soaring, sometimes like a trapped animal trying to escape from a cage, or a fly trying to batter through some glass to the light. Then a door seems to open, and the piano breaks free. The baritone sax catches up with the clarinet, and for a brief moment, they concur and flow. Then they each veer off on their separate flights.
I wanted to write a story that was a page-turner, so I wanted it to be plotted with twists, because that always engages me when I read a lot of thrillers and crime and John le Carré and stuff like that. And Olin Steinhauer is the modern equivalent of le Carré. And it's the twists that get me through to the end of the book. But I also wanted it to be absolutely authentic. I wanted it to be something that you would believe might be possible and be real. And I think everybody that I know knows somebody who is autistic or suffering from Asperger's now, whether they're children of people that have had autistic children, or they're just people who they know are borderline. And I think that we probably also know people who believe that they're a psychic, who may be or may not be. I know several people, several women who believe that they can see angels. It can actually be, as it is for my hero, disabling. He doesn't really want this, but he can't stop it. And so the story is about how the people around him help him to harness what's going on for him and stabilize him. But at the heart of the story is music, is sound, is the music business, is a bunch of musicians and a bunch of painters and artists, and the widow of an artist. The old guy eventually dies. And of course, a concert at the end. And I always like to have a concert at the end of my stories. I've written a few that have ended in concerts that I haven't published, but they're not as good as this one. I think this one has worked out well. But Walter's the young musician. His father realizes his music and they perform it. I don't think I'm giving anything away. There are so many strands in this. So many different intertwining stories, but certainly the significance of music in the story is really important. This is my currency, this is my language, this is what I know best of all. I know how it works, I know how it affects people, I know how it affects people even when it fails. There's a way of using language which is musical, and there's a way of using language which is non-musical. And I wanted to make sure that there was music in the words as well as in the characters, and you constantly would be summoning it up and trying to imagine it. There will be people that read it who won't have a musical bone in their body, and they won't be reading the same book, but I hope they'll enjoy it. And the thing about the narration is that he confesses very early that he's writing the book in order to find out what happened. And he's saying at the beginning of telling the story, I don't need to be forgiven. But when we get to the end, we have to draw our own conclusion as to whether he needs to be forgiven or not. And he doesn't seem to know. And it is a bit rock and roll in that we are left as readers to make some kind of decisions for our characters in the story.
We have moments when everything changes for us, and I think this is what happens to him. He's very, very happy in his job. He's got a lovely wife, a prospective wife, a beautiful Irish girl who works in radio news, and she's hoping that, she thinks he's a clever guy, and she's hoping that he will become a poet. They have a good life together, and he's in this great little R&B band that play at gigs and have a solid audience, and he loves it. He's a singer, but also a harmonica player, and his harmonica playing is his big thing. It's what he's extremely good at it. And he has a gimmick which I won't go into right now, but he has a gimmick which signals the moment which he's going to take off as a musician. And suddenly he realises that this group of middle-aged women that are funding that are out on the headline, and it's not in the story, but this is something that it conjured up, are actually there to forget their troubles. That's why they've come to see this band. They want to get drunk, do a few lines of coke, and forget their troubles. And
there seems to be two huge anxieties in the novel, and one is Walter's anxiety that the kind of mythic, magical, shamanistic thing that he does on stage, which is, as you say, a gesture. It's a gimmick that he does with his mouth organ that could be the equivalent of the windmill guitar or any number of great rock gestures that are so totemic. But it strikes me that his great anxiety is that might be meaningless in the end. It might not nourish him or his audience anymore, and he goes on this long journey, chiefly into his garden, but all over the place, sort of repudiating his band and his shamanistic rock and roll power. And it struck me that that's one of the anxieties of the book, that the mythic power of music and art might not be enough to hold back the tide of this increasingly scary world.
It's going to be successful. All I care about really is that I'm creative and I'm able to continue to be creative. And of course, the new legacy is principally mine as a creative person. But I said that the book had a function. I don't need to write a novel. I'm hoping that by addressing something that I've lived with now since I started this project for 10 years, 11 years now, that I'm sensing that this issue that we have, that we are aware of the fact that we are in incredible trouble. Every intelligent, responsible author, every intelligent, responsible creative person has to look at the fact that this is something that we all feel. And I hope you don't mind me using the royal we here, but I think it's something that we all feel. So the book is just the first step. As somebody that has some success in dealing with and raising spiritual issues, offering spiritual answers, if you like, or spiritual distraction, or maybe even just raw entertainment, as a way of helping people to have a good day, or have a good week, or, as several people in my life, important people have said to me, Prince Charles isn't one of them, but Ben Kingsley is. Quadrophenia changed my life. Or Eddie Vedder, who says that quadrophenia saved his life. So I did something that saved somebody's life. So I deserve my honorary doctorate. But I think the thing I'm excited by, and I hope I have enough time to finish this off. I started this in 2008. I'm full of ideas and full of excitement. So I think, in a sense, what happens next with this is that I hope that I can now do what I feel this book demands of me, which is, what are you going to do with this musically, Pete? What are you going to do with this artistically? How are you going to turn this into something else that really has a broader appeal than just a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end? So I'm challenged by this, and that's what I wanted to do, is to challenge myself. And I do feel that there's nothing in here that's political. There's nothing in here that is easily solvable. There's no science, there's no facts. It's just about what we feel. And that's the language that I speak, I think, as an artist and a musician and a writer. And I think I'm excited about what I might be able to do with it next. It was interesting because when I did Quadrophenia, when I did Lifehouse, when I did Tommy, when I did those projects, I was always excited about what was going to happen next. But in each case, the Who was so busy, so active, so caught up in the career, partly by the spark of the success of those pieces, that I wasn't able to do what happens next. With this, I'm hoping that I can actually do or be a part of what happens next with this.
Yeah. Now, you've given it the title, The Age of Anxiety, which is an Auden line. Is Auden important to you? Is he someone who was an influence on the book?
Yeah, I love him. I loved his ordinary poetry. I love it. But I didn't come up with the title. My wife came up with the title. I had another working title, and she came up with this title. And I said to her, I can't use it because Auden wrote this fabulous long poem. It's almost about half the thickness, called The Age of Anxiety. In fact, Leonard Bernstein wrote a symphony based on it, or a song cycle. And it's about four people in 1947 after the war having a conversation, a progressive conversation over a number of weeks, where they meet in a bar and they talk about what a mess the world is in. And even though the war is over, where they're going to go next, and all of their different issues. Some of them are just worried about what kind of haircut to have, somebody else is worried about what cocktail they should drink, and somebody else is worried about where in America they should move to, where in Europe they should move to. So it's a long conversation. It's very, he calls it an eclogue. I'm not quite sure what that means, but that's what he calls it.
It's a pastoral poetry, I think.
Yeah. So I went back and I got halfway through it. I'd read it before when I was younger, and I thought, actually, no, this is fine. I'm quite happy to bring the expression The Age of Anxiety into the present day and to own it. I'm big enough a celebrity to transfer it into the world and for it to be an echo of what he started. I write all the time. I write pages and pages and pages every day of all different kinds of things, essays and diaries and mind farts, and I've got one project called Aimlessness, and every day I try to contribute to it, and it's something that, in other words, anything, it doesn't matter what it is, and it's some of my best writing. So I'm writing all the time, but what I did with this first was I constructed a plot.
Still also working with Bush, doing room tours, and hopefully the money that generates for me will help me to move on with this. But before the book was even published, there was a film deal done on the back of the book, just I suppose on the basis of my name. And I just hope that somebody making a film based on this book doesn't fucking get in my way. Because I do think that the most important thing next for this is music. It's music. Will I be able to perform music which rise or commission music? I was talking earlier about finding electronic musicians. The first thing I wanted to do with this was to make the music of the soundscapes, the stuff that Walter hears. I wanted to do it electronically with electronic music, because I've been working with electronica since 1971, and I'm very adept at it, and I'm skilled at it. However, not enough to actually make this work. I couldn't do it. I fiddled around with my synthesizers in my big studio and made lots of funny noises, and I thought, this is not as good as the words. The words are better. Because, in the end, the commission that I did is I gave the commission to a young composer who actually turned these soundscapes into music. But I want to take it further. I want to go back and look again at whether or not there are other chapters, other shades. This is just me as a composer. It's kind of a little bit wanky.